when rancher Clint Walker spotted what looked like a lifeless Mustang Foal floating in Crystal Lake. His heart sank. The tiny body appeared motionless, another tragic victim of the harsh Wyoming wilderness. But as Clint waded into the freezing water to retrieve what he thought was a corpse, something absolutely shocking happened, something that would change both their lives forever. What began as a heartbreaking discovery turned into a miracle that defied all odds and proved that sometimes hope appears when we least expect it. This is a story of second chances, unbreakable bonds, and the incredible will to survive against impossible circumstances. The morning mist hung low over Crystal Lake as Clint Walker made his routine rounds across the Walker Ranch. The 42-year-old, a fourth-generation rancher, had witnessed his share of nature's cruelties, but nothing had prepared him for what he found at the lake's edge on that cold October morning. Through the grey dawn light, Clint spotted something unusual floating near the shore. His weathered hands tightened around his coffee mug as he squinted through the fog. What he saw made his stomach drop. The unmistakable form of a young Mustang Foal, seemingly lifeless, bobbing gently in the dark water. Clint's mind raced. He set down his mug and rushed toward the lake. The wild Mustang herds had been struggling through one of the harshest early winters in decades. Food was scarce, and the bitter cold had already claimed several adult horses from their local bands. But seeing the foal barely old enough to survive on its own was heartbreaking beyond words. The small body appeared to belong to a painted Mustang, its distinctive black and white markings stark against the dark water. Clint guessed the foal couldn't have been more than 3 months old, far too young to be alone under normal circumstances. As Clint approached the water's edge, his boots crunched on the frost-covered grass. The lake was shallow near the shore, but the water was bone-chilling. Without hesitation, he stepped in, his jeans instantly soaking through as he waded toward the motionless form. "Poor little guy," Clint whispered, his breath forming clouds. In the frigid air, he had planned to retrieve the body and give it a proper burial. It was the least he could do for the beautiful creature that had met such a tragic end. The water reached his knees as he drew closer to the foal. The small horse looked peaceful, as if it had simply gone to sleep on the water's surface. Even soaked, its coat revealed the striking markings that would have made it a stunning adult Mustang. Clint reached out with gentle hands, prepared to lift the small body from the water, but as his fingers touched the foal's neck, something incredible happened. He felt the faintest flutter of a pulse beneath his fingertips. His heart nearly stopped. "No way," he breathed, leaning closer to examine the foal more carefully. The chest was barely moving, almost imperceptible, but there was definitely life still fighting within this tiny body. The foal's eyes remained closed, and its body was dangerously cold to the touch. But Clint now realized he wasn't looking at a corpse. He was witnessing a miracle. This little Mustang was clinging to life by the thinnest of threads, floating in a state that could only be described as suspended animation. Without wasting another second, Clint scooped the foal into his arms. The small horse was surprisingly light, its body limp and unresponsive, but the weak heartbeat against Clint's chest confirmed what seemed impossible. Against all odds, this little fighter was still alive. As Clint carried the unconscious foal toward shore, he knew the next few hours would determine whether this shocking discovery would become a story of miraculous rescue or heartbreaking loss. Clint's mind shifted into emergency mode as he moved quickly toward the ranch house. Every second counted, and the foal's body temperature was dangerously low. The foal remained completely unresponsive, its breathing so shallow that Clint had to press his ear against its chest just to confirm the heartbeat was still there. "Come on, little one. Stay with me," Clint murmured, quickening his pace across the frost-covered field. His wet jeans clung uncomfortably to his legs, but he barely noticed the cold. All his focus was on the fragile life in his arms. The ranch house came into view, and Clint burst through the back door, startling his wife, Sarah, who was preparing breakfast in the kitchen. The 38-year-old former veterinary technician took one look at the limp foal in her husband's arms and sprang into action. "Kitchen table now," Sarah commanded, sweeping dishes aside to make room. Her trained eyes quickly assessed the situation as Clint gently laid the foal down. "How long was it in the water?" she asked. "I don't know," Clint replied, his voice tight with worry. "Could be hours, maybe all night, Sarah. I thought it was dead. It was just floating there. Like its pulse is weak but steady," Sarah interrupted, her fingers expertly checking vital signs. "Core temperature is critically low. We need to warm it gradually, or we could cause more damage, Sarah." had assisted the local veterinarian for 8 years before retiring to focus on the ranch, and now her medical knowledge was about to be put to the ultimate test. She grabbed towels from the linen closet and began gently drying the foal's coat, while Clint started a fire in the nearby fireplace. The foal, which they would later name Phoenix, for its miraculous survival, showed no response to their efforts. Its eyes remained closed, and its body stayed completely limp. The only signs of life were a faint heartbeat and barely perceptible breathing. "We need to call Dr. Martinez," Sarah said, referring to the local large animal veterinarian. "But in this weather, it'll take her at least an hour to get here." Through the back roads, Clint was already reaching for his phone when Sarah's voice stopped him. "Wait," she whispered, leaning closer to the foal. "Look at its nostrils." Clint peered down and saw what had caught Sarah's attention, the tiniest flutter of movement as the foal's breathing became slightly more pronounced. It was still unconscious, but something was changing. "The warming is helping," Sarah observed, continuing to massage the foal's legs to stimulate circulation. "But Clint, even if we can stabilize it, this little one is going to need round-the-clock care. Foals separated from their mothers this young." She didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew the challenges ahead would be immense. Without its mother's milk and protection, the foal would need constant feeding, warmth, and medical attention. Even then, survival wasn't guaranteed. But as Clint looked down at the small Mustang lying on their kitchen table, something stirred in his chest. This wasn't just any abandoned foal. This was a fighter, one who had somehow survived being submerged in freezing water. If Phoenix had the will to fight, Clint was determined to give it every chance to live. "Make the call," Clint said firmly. "And Sarah, start heating some goat's milk. We're going to save this little one." The foal's breathing grew slightly stronger as the warmth from the towels and nearby fire began to raise its body temperature. The miracle Clint had witnessed at the lake was just the beginning of an incredible journey, one that would test their limits and prove that sometimes love and determination can overcome even the most impossible odds. Dr. Elena Martinez arrived at the Walker Ranch 90 minutes later, her veterinary truck sliding slightly on the frost-covered driveway. The 45-year-old veterinarian had responded to countless emergency calls in her 20-year career, but the story Clint relayed over the phone was unlike anything she had ever encountered. Phoenix lay on a makeshift bed of blankets near the fireplace, still unconscious, but showing subtle signs of improvement. The foal's breathing had become more regular, and its body temperature was slowly rising under the careful warming protocol Sarah had implemented. "Remarkable," Dr. Martinez whispered as she conducted her examination. "The hypothermia should have been fatal. Most animals submerged in water that cold for that long don't survive, especially not a young foal." She drew blood samples and checked the foal's reflexes, documenting everything for what she suspected would become a veterinary case study. "The heartbeat is strengthening, and I'm detecting slight muscle response to stimuli. Whatever happened in that lake, this little one's survival instincts are extraordinary." Clint paced nervously as Dr. Martinez worked. "Will Phoenix make it?" he asked, unable to hide the emotion in his voice. "Phoenix," Dr. Martinez repeated, smiling softly. "Rising from apparent death, a fitting name. Honestly, Clint, the next 48 hours are critical. If the foal regains consciousness and can take nourishment, there's hope. But even then, raising an orphaned Mustang Foal is incredibly challenging." Sarah had been researching foal care on her tablet throughout the morning. "I found a specialist mare's milk replacer formula," she reported, "and there are detailed feeding schedules for orphaned foals. If Phoenix wakes up, we'll be ready." As if responding to its name, the foal's eyelids fluttered slightly. All three adults leaned closer, holding their breath. Phoenix's eyes opened for just a moment, revealing beautiful, dark brown irises before closing again, but it was enough to send a surge of hope through the room. "That's the first conscious response," Dr. Martinez noted, making entries in her chart. "It's a very positive sign." Over the next 6 hours, Phoenix gradually emerged from its near-death state. The foal's first real awakening came as the sun was setting, casting golden light across the ranch house. Clint was sitting beside the makeshift bed when Phoenix suddenly lifted its head, looking around with confused but alert eyes. "Sarah, Dr. Martinez," Clint called out. "Phoenix is awake." The foal attempted to stand, its long legs unsteady and trembling. Clint gently supported the small Mustang as it struggled to find balance. Phoenix was weak but determined, and after several attempts, managed to stand on shaky legs. Now comes the real test, Dr. Martinez said, preparing a bottle of warm milk replacer. If Phoenix doesn't take the bottle, we'll have to use a feeding tube with its complications. Sarah approached slowly with the bottle, speaking in soft, soothing tones. Come on, baby. You need to eat to get strong. Phoenix sniffed the bottle curiously, its natural instincts wrestling with confusion. The foal had never encountered anything like this artificial nipple, but its survival depended on accepting it as a substitute for its mother's milk. For several tense minutes, Phoenix turned its head away, nickering softly and refusing the bottle. Clint's heart sank as he watched the foal reject the life-giving nutrition it so desperately needed. Then, as if making a conscious decision to trust the strange humans who had saved its life, Phoenix tentatively took the nipple in its mouth and began to suck. The warm milk flowed, and the foal's survival instincts took over completely. Yes, Sarah exclaimed softly, tears streaming down her face as Phoenix drank hungrily. Dr. Martinez smiled broadly. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we have ourselves a miracle. This little Mustang isn't just going to survive, it's going to thrive. But even as they celebrated this crucial victory, none of them could have anticipated the challenges that lay ahead or the extraordinary bond that would soon form between Clint and the wild foal he'd saved from the depths of Crystal Lake. 3 weeks had passed since Phoenix's miraculous rescue, and the young Mustang had defied every expectation under Clint and Sarah's devoted care. The foal had grown stronger each day. Its coat had developed a lustrous shine, and its eyes sparkled with growing curiosity about the world around it. However, Phoenix's wild heritage was becoming more apparent with each passing day. Unlike domestic foals, Phoenix possessed an untamed spirit that made traditional training methods ineffective. The young horse was intelligent and alert, but also fiercely independent and instinctively wary of confinement. Clint discovered this firsthand one evening when he tried to let Phoenix into the barn. Now strong enough to move with surprising speed and agility, the foal reared up and yanked away from the lead rope, eyes flashing with the wild freedom running through its bloodline. Easy, Phoenix, Clint said calmly, approaching with open hands. I'm not trying to cage you, buddy. Sarah watched from the barn doorway, immediately recognizing the deeper challenge. Clint, this isn't a domestic horse we're dealing with. Phoenix's instincts are telling it that enclosed spaces mean danger. The situation became more complicated when Dr. Martinez returned for a follow-up examination and brought concerning news. I've been in contact with the Bureau of Land Management, she said. They've been tracking the local Mustang herds. Phoenix's mother was likely part of a group that scattered during a severe storm 3 weeks ago. Clint's heart sank. You're saying Phoenix might have family out there? It's possible. Dr. Martinez nodded. But Clint, there's something else you need to know. The BLM is planning a roundup of the scattered Mustangs next month. Any wild horses found on public land will be captured and taken to holding facilities. The news hit Clint like a physical blow. Phoenix had survived against impossible odds only to now face life in a government holding pen. It was a fate that often meant a slow decline for wild Mustangs who couldn't adapt to captivity. That night, Clint sat with Phoenix under the stars, the young Mustang grazing peacefully beside him. Phoenix had learned to trust him completely, often following Clint around the ranch like a loyal dog. But when the foal gazed toward the distant mountains, Clint could still see the wildness in its eyes, the longing for something more than fences and paddocks. What am I supposed to do with you, little one? Clint murmured, gently stroking Phoenix's neck. You are not meant for a life behind fences, but out there. As if sensing Clint's inner turmoil, Phoenix nuzzled against his shoulder, a gesture of affection that had become their nightly ritual. The bond between them had grown stronger than Clint ever imagined possible, but he knew that love sometimes meant making difficult choices. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Maria Santos, a local Mustang advocate and trainer. She had heard about Phoenix's story from Dr. Martinez and drove straight to the ranch. The 52-year-old woman had spent her life working with wild horses and immediately recognized the unique challenges Clint was facing. That's a special horse you've got there, Maria observed, watching Phoenix move with the natural grace of its wild ancestors. But Clint, keeping a Mustang contained, goes against everything in their nature. Phoenix needs to learn to be wild again, or it'll never truly be free. Clint felt torn between his deepening love for Phoenix and the understanding that Maria was right. How do I teach a foal to be wild? He asked, when it's only ever known human care. Maria smiled gently, very carefully, and with a lot of patience. But first, we need to make sure Phoenix survives what's coming. The BLM roundup is scheduled for next month. If they catch Phoenix, this story ends badly, as Clint watched Phoenix playing in the morning sunlight. The weight of what lay ahead settled heavily on his shoulders. He was facing the most difficult decision of his life. How do you prepare someone you love for a world that might destroy them? And how do you find the strength to let them go when every instinct tells you to hold on tight? The November wind cut across the Walker Ranch with an ominous chill as Clint stood at the edge of the pasture, watching Phoenix gallop freely. In the 6 weeks since the rescue, the young Mustang had grown remarkably, its legs longer and stronger, its movements fluid and wild. But with each passing day, Clint's heart grew heavier. Maria Santos had been visiting the ranch 3 times a week, working with Phoenix on what she called rewilding training. The process was unlike anything Clint had ever seen. Maria wasn't trying to tame Phoenix, she was helping it remember the instincts it should have learned from its mother. Wild Mustangs survive through wariness, Maria explained one afternoon, as they watched Phoenix practice the alert postures. She had taught, Phoenix needs to learn to be suspicious of humans again, even though it goes against every bond you've built. The cruel irony wasn't lost on Clint. To save Phoenix's life, he had to teach it not to trust him. Dr. Martinez arrived on a grey Thursday morning with devastating news. The BLM roundup has been moved up, she said grimly. They'll be here next week. Clint, if they find Phoenix on your property, they'll classify it as a captured wild horse. You'll lose any legal claim, and Phoenix will be taken straight to a holding facility. Sarah stepped closer, taking Clint's hand. There has to be something we can do, some legal protection. I've researched every option, Dr. Martinez replied with frustration. Phoenix is too young to be part of any protected herd documentation. Legally, it's an orphaned wild Mustang, which makes it government property. That evening, Clint made the most difficult decision of his life. He called Maria. We need to accelerate Phoenix's rewilding, he said quietly. How long before it can survive on its own? Maria was silent for a long moment. Then she answered carefully. Clint, Phoenix is strong and intelligent, but it's still young. Ideally, a Mustang Foal stays with its mother for at least a year. We're talking about sending a 6-month-old into one of the harshest winters on record. But could it survive? Clint pressed. Maybe, she admitted. With luck and if everything goes right, maybe. But Clint, once Phoenix goes wild, there's no calling it back. If it gets injured or sick, you'll never know. Are you prepared for that? Clint looked out at Phoenix, who was standing by the fence watching him with those trusting eyes. The foal nickered softly when it saw Clint, expecting their usual evening treats and affection. I don't have a choice, Maria, Clint said quietly. A slim chance at freedom is better than certain death in a holding pen. The next morning, Clint began the heartbreaking process of teaching Phoenix to fear humans using techniques Maria had shown him. He started approaching the foal with intentionally threatening gestures, making loud noises, and creating negative associations with human contact. Phoenix's confusion was devastating to witness. The young Mustang would approach Clint with its usual trust, only to be met with rejection and intimidation. By the 3rd day, Phoenix had stopped trying to nuzzle Clint's shoulder and instead kept a wary distance. It's working, Maria observed, though her voice carried no satisfaction. Phoenix is starting to exhibit natural flight responses. But Clint, this is going to be the hardest part. Once we release Phoenix, you can never go back to the way things were. As the BLM roundup approached, Clint spent sleepless nights watching Phoenix from his bedroom window. The young Mustang was adapting to its new reality, becoming more alert and skittish with each passing day. But Clint could still see the hurt and confusion in those dark, intelligent eyes, and it was tearing him apart. On the final night before the planned release, Clint broke every rule Maria had set. He couldn't help himself. He went to Phoenix one last time, offering the gentle touch and soft words that had defined their bond from the beginning. Phoenix hesitated, its newly learned wariness warring with the deep connection they had shared. Finally, the young Mustang stepped forward and rested its head against Clint's chest, just as it had during those fragile first days of recovery. I'm so sorry, Phoenix, Clint whispered, tears streaming down his face. I love you too much to let them cage you. You were meant to run free. The next morning dawned clear and cold, fresh snow dusting the distant mountains where the wild Mustang herds roamed. Clint stood at the pasture gate, his hands trembling as he prepared to open it for the last time. Maria Santos stood nearby, ready to help guide Phoenix toward the path that would lead to the open range. "Remember," Maria said gently, "once Phoenix leaves, you can't follow. You can't check on it, and you can't try to help if you see it struggling. The only way this works is if you let go completely." Sarah stood on the ranch house porch, her arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming silently as she watched the scene unfold. Dr. Martinez had positioned herself with binoculars, ready to document Phoenix's departure for her research records. Though they all knew this was about much more than science, Phoenix stood in the center of the pasture, its dark eyes alert and cautious. The young Mustang had grown magnificently over the past weeks, its coat thick and glossy, its legs strong and sure. The rewarding training had awakened instincts that now made it wary of human approach, but Clint could still see a flicker of recognition in those soulful eyes. "Okay, Phoenix," Clint whispered, his voice breaking. "This is it. This is your chance to be what you were meant to be." He opened the gate and stepped back, his heart pounding as Phoenix immediately noticed the change. The Mustang approached the opening cautiously, sniffing the air that carried the scent of the wild country beyond the ranch boundaries. For a moment, Phoenix stood at the threshold, looking back at Clint with an expression that held both gratitude and goodbye. Then, as if making a conscious choice, Phoenix stepped through the gate onto the path that led to freedom. Clint watched, breath caught in his throat, as Phoenix began to trot, then canter, then break into a full gallop across the open meadow. The young horse moved with such grace and power that it took his breath away, every stride carrying it farther from safety and deeper into the uncertain world of the wild. "Look," Maria breathed, pointing toward a distant ridge. Through her binoculars, Dr. Martinez could see what had caught Maria's attention. "There's a small herd on the northern ridge. 3 mares and a yearling." Phoenix was heading straight toward them. Clint's heart pounded as he watched from afar. This was the moment of truth. Would the wild herd accept an orphan foal raised by humans? The late mare lifted her head, alert to Phoenix's approach. For several tense minutes, the horses sized each other up across the distance. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a gesture that brought tears to everyone's eyes, one of the mares nickered softly and stepped forward to meet Phoenix. "She's accepting him," Dr. Martinez whispered, her voice full of wonder. "The mare is letting Phoenix approach the herd." Clint watched through tears as Phoenix was welcomed into the small Mustang family. The young horse who had nearly died in the icy waters of Crystal Lake was now running free, exactly as nature had intended. 3 days later, the BLM roundup began, but they found no trace of Phoenix or the small herd that had adopted him. The Mustangs had vanished into the vast Wyoming wilderness, safe from capture and free to live as their ancestors had for generations. Clint never saw Phoenix again, but often he'd find himself standing on the porch at dusk, scanning the distant ridges with binoculars, hoping for just a glimpse of the horse he had rescued and loved enough to let go. Maria assured him that Phoenix's survival training had been excellent and that the young Mustang had every chance of thriving in the wild. Still, the ache in Clint's chest never fully left. On quiet evenings, Clint would walk down to Crystal Lake, where it had all begun. Sometimes, just sometimes, he could swear he heard the faint sound of hoofbeats in the distance, carried on the wind like a message of gratitude from a wild heart that had never forgotten the man who gave it a second chance. Phoenix had taught Clint that true love isn't about holding on. It's about having the courage to let go when freedom matters more than comfort. And in the vast, untamed wilderness of Wyoming, a young Mustang now ran free, carrying with it the love, sacrifice, and hope of a rancher who once pulled it from the depths and showed it that miracles are possible when we refuse to give up. Phoenix's story reminds us that sometimes the greatest acts of love require the deepest sacrifices. Clint's decision to rescue a dying foal from Crystal Lake began as an act of compassion, but his choice to release Phoenix into the wild became an act of true love. In a world where we often try to hold tightly to what we care about, Clint showed us that sometimes loving something means giving it the freedom to become what it was always meant to be, even if it breaks your heart. The bond between Clint and Phoenix proves that connections formed in moments of crisis can transcend species and time. Though they were separated by necessity, the love and care Clint gave during Phoenix's most vulnerable days gave the young Mustang the strength and confidence to thrive in the wild. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. Leave a like if Clint's journey inspired you, and share this story with someone who needs a reminder that sometimes the hardest choices led to the most beautiful outcomes. What would you do if you had to choose between keeping someone you love safe and giving them the freedom they need to truly live? Let us know in the comments below, and remember, true love always finds a way to set others free.